Salton Sea, what a thought. It's of course an artificial lake. The levees, when they were building the Colorado Aqueduct, were breached, and for 2 years, water from the Colorado River fell into the below sea level depression that took them a very long time to plug that breach. And all of a sudden, we had the Salton Sea. It has appeared on and off throughout history, going back millions of years. And this is the latest version. It evaporates about 1.5 million acre-feet a year, and if you don't put that water into it, you'll have a desert again. And unfortunately, this time the desert is filled with a lot of agricultural runoff that has all kinds of pesticides. Pesticides that accumulated before we had more controls on the kind of pesticides we use. So the playa that's enlarging the shoreline along that lake really is toxic. Now, if it was the 1950s, we would have already built an 80-mile tunnel from the ocean to the Salton Sea. We would generate hydropower at the same time, and we'd keep the level of that lake up and use some of that energy for other things. That's the kind of thinking that got us into some trouble. I mean, we built projects in the 1950s and 60s and even in the 20s and 30s here in California that is the most remarkable plumbing system in the world. Not all of it was thoughtful, but what we've got has been sustaining us now for a good 50 years without any significant upgrades or even maintenance in many respects, while our population has doubled. We've done a really good job with conservation. I guess I'll segue into the slide now. Conservation in California is yielding diminishing returns because we've done so much already. The pie charts here, they were up. That's kind of interesting. Yeah. There they are. That's still there? Came and went. There's two pies there. They're sized in proportion to the amount. What you've got there is a wet year and a dry year. It's taken from recent years. It's using data from the Department of Water Resources here in California. And what it's referring to are how we use the water that we divert. You know, in California, the watersheds are roughly equivalent to the geographic boundaries of the state. So you can estimate how much rain we've got and how much ends up percolating or going into the springs and into the streams and into the rivers. It's 100 million acre-feet in a dry year falls on the state, and about 300 million acre-feet in a wet year. So there's an awful lot of variability. The diversions vary accordingly, although by not as much of a dimension. In the dry years and wet years, the agricultural and urban consumption of water is pretty stable. 7 or 8 million acre-feet is what our cities consume every year, and that hasn't changed much. Farm water consumption actually goes up a little in dry years because they have to irrigate more when it's hot. But that's been stable at a little over 30 million acre-feet. But in a wet year, the environmental diversions, you know, and when you divert water, that's referring to water that's reserved in reservoirs or withdrawn directly from rivers into bypasses or for agricultural irrigation. So these diversions are much more variable for the environment. It goes from, I think up there it says something like 22 million acre-feet in a dry year and 64 million acre-feet in a wet year. So that you know, really swings around depending on how much water we've got to work with. But the thing is, farm acreage has gone up in California, and the productivity of farms in California has gone way up. But the amount of water the farmers have been using has stayed stable. And also, in the 1970s, early 1980s, we consumed about 7 or 8 million acre-feet of water in our cities, and that bumped up to about 9.5 million acre-feet in the 90s. And then conservation started to keep up with population growth and actually brought the absolute total down. So our per capita water consumption is way down in our cities. We are using the same amount of water in California cities as we were 40, 50 years ago, even though our population's gone from 25 million to almost 40 million. The point here is we've already done a pretty good job of conservation, and we're at a point of diminishing returns. And the conservation, the little slice there, that little infinitesimally small slice, that's what's represented by the results of what they're calling conservation as a way of life. It's a package of several legislative actions that are being implemented over time. I think by 2030 they expect to be done with this. It's going to restrict urban water consumption to 42 gallons per person per day, indoor water consumption, and it's going to require property owners to have an outdoor landscaping water budget that you'll negotiate with your water district. Now, I don't want to exaggerate the problem because it's going to depend on your water district. The water district's going to be given a number by the state based on population, and then it's going to be up to the water district to determine whether they want that to be they have to hold to the aggregate. They don't necessarily have to come down on every single homeowner. If some people use less than the average that's required, other people can use more. But the bottom line is they're going to spend an estimated $7 billion to implement this, and they're going to save 400,000 acre feet, which is barely 1% of what we divert for farms and cities, and it's barely a half of 1% of what we divert on average every year. So again, it's a fairly annoying set of regulations that are going to be imposed on people that want to have, if you want to have a lawn, or if you want to take a long shower or whatever. My wife has very long hair, and she takes long showers because evidently that's how you get shampoo out of long hair. I haven't had long hair since I was 20, so that's, I think I covered most of the stuff on that slide. This one I really think, this is really interesting to me. This is how, the red is how much water gets sent south in the California Aqueduct and the Delta Mendota Aqueduct. And the blue is how much water flows into the San Francisco Bay. So this is this is what we're looking at in terms of outflow from the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. This is millions of acre feet. We've had, as you can see, 3 very wet years preceded by 3 very dry years. And then the last one here is only through April. But it's a normal year. We didn't have normal snow, but we did have normal water. That's probably going to settle in around 15 million, and this is going to go up as well. We don't know yet. But the real question, and this is a fundamental question that Sacramento owes us an answer to, and that is how much water going out of the Delta is enough. How much water will mean that we can have healthy ecosystems in the Delta and in the San Francisco Bay? Now, if you set that number at 15 million acre feet, which is a very reasonable number, the number changes. They keep raising the bar, but the Public Policy Research Institute came up with 12 million acre feet. And I can quote from their 2017 study, more than enough to maintain healthy ecosystems in the Delta and in the San Francisco Bay. But just pick 15 million acre feet. If we had been able to safely withdraw the water in excess of 15 million acre feet, we would have been able to transport or reserve another 19 million acre feet, which more than doubles the amount of water that actually was reserved and exported into the aqueducts. So that's a fundamental question that has to be answered. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else I want to talk about with this slide. I think that I should add 4 slides. I'll talk about the ways we can get the water out of the Delta, and that, unfortunately, the next slide is something else. So let's just start with this. Yeah.
So you're saying that we waste most of the water that we get out the Delta well beyond what we need to keep today healthy?
I believe that I personally believe 15 million acre feet is enough flow to
So if
maintain
we
a healthy
reserve
delta and
that,
healthy
we
San
could double
Francisco
the
Bay.
amount we send downstate, something like that.
If we had a way to safely withdraw it, that's the real challenge. But before we seriously can address that challenge, we ought to have a dialogue with the people that are very concerned about the health of these ecosystems and ask for a number. You know, maybe it's 20 million. Look, that we'd still have been able to pull 7 million out if we had a way, the means to do it in 2023. I don't think 20 million is more than enough, in my opinion.
Bottom line, we're wasting millions of acre feet that we don't need to be wasting.
Yeah, but we have to have a way to get it out of the delta, and that's the hard part. And that's not a challenge we can lightly dismiss, because we have to figure out how to get that water out without completely compromising the ecosystem, because that water typically is only coming out of there during 100 days, you know, the wet months of the year. So how are you going to move that kind of water? And this is where you get to the capacity. I mean, there's three things here. There's the storage, got to put it somewhere. There is the transportation, you've got to move it. And then the hardest of all is there's the actual diversion, the withdrawal of the water. How are you going to do that? So we could start with the transportation. The aqueducts together have a capacity of 30,000 acre feet a day. That's 11 million acre feet a year. If you ran them 100 days at full capacity and the rest of the year at half capacity, which is a reasonable possibility, you'd be looking at 7 million acre feet a year, which is well in excess of what we've ever pulled out of the delta. I mean, that would be enough. You know, we would not have water scarcity if we did that in California. So we have to fix the aqueducts. We've had depletion of the aquifers all throughout the San Joaquin Valley, and as a result, the aquifers the aqueducts only operated about 70 to 80% of their capacity. So we can't, and that depends on where you're putting the water. We can pump 30,000 acre feet a day if we put it all in like San Luis and some of the northern reaches. But when you get through the next 5 pump stations, you're going through stretches of the aqueduct that are compromised. So if you had to bring it all the way to LA, you could only do that at a rate of about 20,000 acre feet a day. You know, and to get into more of the particulars, you have the state water project, which is the California aqueduct, is the big one. That's 20,000 acre feet a day. And then you have the Delta Mendota Canal, which is the federal project. That's 10,000 acre feet a day. So in both cases, and that one doesn't go as far south. It mostly Fresno County, some of Kern County gets that water. So those aqueducts have to be repaired. And then if you wanted to get even more, if you wanted to transport even more water, you would probably want to, the first thing you might want to consider is to extend the Folsom South Canal, which is the canal that nobody's ever heard of. It comes off of the American River. It has a capacity of about 3 million acre feet a year if you kept it full. But it terminates at the Rancho Seco area south of Sacramento. You need to add about another 25 miles, and you could get it to the forebay, the Clifton Court forebay that feeds the pumps, the Delta pumps. So that would, then you could get your number up to 10 million acre feet a year, which is, you know, that's so much. But the other thing is, you're not necessarily moving that water all year round. So having that capacity would be very useful. So the next question, though, is how do you get the water, where do you put it? And the most cost-effective way to store the water is to let it percolate underground. It's surprising to me that they're not doing more of that, but the reason they're not doing more of that is, first of all, if they percolate surplus water, first of all, they have to be sent surplus water. Okay? So that's a barrier. Then, if they get the surplus water, it can't come out of their normal allocation. So the farmers aren't going to accept surplus water to percolate if that takes away from the water they need to irrigate later in the year. So that has to be fixed. I think the third barrier, which is it might use up too much land, is kind of going away, because what they're looking at in the San Joaquin Valley right now is the retirement of 1 million acres of farmland. There's 4.5 million acres of irrigated farmland in the San Joaquin Valley, and 25% of it's at risk of just not being used anymore for agriculture. Now, if you percolate that water, if they were able to move that water into the feeder aqueducts, the The big aqueducts, there's just this giant, it's like a circulatory system. The water goes into every bit of farm acreage throughout that valley. And if they could divert that water to percolate, even at a rate, and by the way, I have this morning, I had a panic attack. I thought, what if I get all these numbers wrong? Here. I only have 2 copies. Anybody else have the other one? Okay, you can correct me if I get this wrong. At 3 inches a day of percolation, which is a common, almost all the land on the east side of the San Joaquin Valley will percolate at that rate. If you had 80,000 of those 4.5 million acres allocated all over the place, collectively though, 80,000 acres, for percolation for 100 days a year, you could store 2 million acre feet a year. This is very feasible. And all of those aquifers are depleted. So that's something that I think might be the easiest part of this whole solution. Now the hardest part of the solution is okay, you can't read it, well, you've got to take it home with you.
Well, you were right on the last sentence.
Thank you. All right, let's keep going.
Just wanted to verify.
Let me see if I can get this one. This next one is harder. There's a lot of ways to get more water out of the delta, and the delta tunnel is the one that we always are hearing about. Yes.
I'm sorry, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Why are they retiring all that?
Yeah. They don't have water.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting though. They're starting to grow agave.
I noticed that.
So there's going to be a lot more tequila in California. I started seeing this just in the last few years. You drive down I-5 and you what's all that cactus? And what it is agave. Now, if you're growing pistachios, you need about 3 feet per acre, of water cumulatively that has to go in to water those orchards per year. 3 acre feet per acre. Tomatoes, it's about 4 acre feet. Almonds, 3.5, 4 acre feet. It depends on the weather, it depends on a lot of things. Agave, I had to ask the guy to repeat it, and I had to have 3 inches. That's all you need. So we're gonna have 1 million acres of agave. We're gonna have so much agave. But that's how the farmers are adapting. But the tunnel, if the tunnel ran at full blast, all year long, it would have capacity to move 4 million acre feet a year. But the tunnel is, first of all, the tunnel will probably never get built. When I've talked to people north of the Delta and I say anything even remotely neutral about the tunnel, I have to run to my car as fast as I can get out. Sorry. Okay, there's a proposal to build a tunnel that will collect water out of the Delta and bring the water to the Clifton Court forebay where the Delta pumps are. It's going to be 45 miles long, 200 feet deep, 40 feet in internal diameter. And it's going to estimate it to cost $20 billion. The Sierra Club estimates it at $56 billion, and I'm here to tell you, for once I believe them. That is a laugh line. Now those guys are, I think they're right about that, and we've got a lot of evidence to document this. The train was supposed to cost $30 billion, and it's up to, there's estimates now saying if they built it to its original design specifications, it'd be $230 billion. Train may never get built, but the tunnel's probably not going to get built because there's too many people that are just so militantly opposed to it that it's probably never going to happen. In fact, I probably wasted your time talking about it. There's another idea, which...
What is the objection?
The objection is they think it's going to drain water out of the Delta and compromise the ecosystems in the Delta, and there's the perception that if they can get that water from the tunnel, they won't have to maintain the levees and the channels in the Delta, and the entire Delta economy is going to go, kaput. And the people north of the Delta are also concerned. I think it's an unrealistic concern, but it's very real. that they're going to drain more water south, and there's not going to be as much water left up north for farmers up there. Infrastructure Funding Act, we attempted to get a ballot initiative to fund water supply projects, and the Farm Bureau said to me, if you include as an eligible project the tunnel, we can't support you. And if you don't include it as an eligible project, we can't support you. That's how controversial it is. It's really bad. One of the problems we have with water policy in California is that there isn't broad agreement. There should be, and it's easier than energy perhaps, because at least it's water. You know, it's not nuclear versus solar versus natural gas versus oil. It's water. So at least everybody recognizes, gee, let's figure out how to get more water. This is the best opportunity. This is the biggest variable. One of the proposals out there is what they call fish-friendly delta diversions, and they really need to come up with a better way to describe that. But what it is they want to cut a channel in the delta, and there's plenty of places where they can do this. Line it with gravel and put perforated pipes under the gravel, and the water will infiltrate. Okay, here we go to the spreadsheet now. If the water infiltrates at a rate of 1 inch per minute, a 250-acre site would be able to withdraw 30,000 acre-feet a day. And it's just gravity fed, and as a result, it doesn't entrain fish larvae, it doesn't endanger salmonids and smelt. It's just gravity-fed water settling in. It would go to a collection pond, then it would get pumped into about a 5 or 6 mile long aqueduct that would connect the central delta to the Clifton Court forebay. They estimate this would only cost $3 billion, which means it might only cost $6 billion. The tunnel, 20 to 60. So it's an extremely cost-effective proposal. They're also looking at using sand instead of gravel as the filtration medium. Now you need about 1,000 acres to get the same amount because it wouldn't settle as fast. But if you did it that way, you'd be able to screen out the golden mussels. How many of you have heard of the golden mussel? A few. This has surfaced so recently. They came out of bilge water or something from a tanker across the Pacific, brought this invasive species over, and it's the worst they've ever seen. They're already spreading everywhere. They're all through the delta. People that have boats in the delta, they're just encrusting their engines. It's getting into pipes, it's clogging pipes. It's a big problem. They haven't figured out what to do about it. But one way that it can be part of the solution to controlling it would be if you withdrew this water through the delta with sand, you could screen all of them out. And then at least you'd have clean water until you go to the next place where there's an infiltration. So they're looking at this solution, whether it's 250 acres or 1,000 acres. The delta is, 150, 200 square miles. You're looking at 1.5 square miles of that could be allocated for this kind of a solution. So that is one way. Now, the other ways to manage the delta and get more water out of the delta, I think, start with dredging. The delta channels are just clogged. The average depth on secondary channels is now a foot. It used to be 12 feet. We dredged the delta ever since it was channelized 150 years ago, and they built all these levees. The farmers did it. They had the clamshell dredgers and they had suction dredgers on barges, and they went through the delta and they used the material to shore up the levees and also to enrich their fields. But a stop was put to that about 50 years ago. Environmentalists determined that it was harmful to the ecosystem. But the problem with that reasoning is that for 100 years they dredged, and the salmon runs were very. There was no problem with the salmon runs. There was no problem with the smelt. And if you look at the deeper channels, the problem with shallow channels is they actually favor the introduced species. So they favor the introduced aquatic plants as well as the introduced bass, for example. And you go down to I live near this American River. You go down to the river and the anglers, they actually tell us that when they're releasing salmon from the hatchery, the bass know, and they come swimming upstream to eat them all. But if you had deeper channels, you'd have cooler water, which salmon prefer, and you would also have you would have deeper channels that the bats just don't like to go down into that deeper water. So we believe that dredging the delta would have an environmental benefit. One of the reasons it's cost ineffective is in California you have to spend $3 in mitigation for every dollar of construction. Now, if you could define dredging as mitigation, you'd be able to build this or operate these dredgers for 1/4 the cost. So we're working on that. But the advantage of dredging is when you have these silted up channels, what happens is at high tide, the salt comes in over the accumulated silt. And then when it's low tide, you need the existing flow to push that salt water back out into the estuaries. And it can't, because the altitude of the sediment, which concentrates at the end of these channels, is too high for any but the most robust flows, maybe during winter, to get the salt water out. Also, if you have deeper channels and a higher volume of water, when you turn on the pumps, you're going to get more of the water from the interior of the delta instead of pulling it in from the bay. And that's not just a matter of ecosystem. You can't put water that's too salty into the aqueducts. You can't use it for irrigation. So those are advantages to dredging that, this is another thing that nobody really talks about. It's not, it's not sexy like let's build the Sykes Reservoir or let's build the Delta Tunnel. It's mundane. Let's just get in there with the dredgers and get all of this silt out of the delta. Now, if you do that in combination with gates to manage tidal energy, you have what could be a comprehensive solution. Because another thing that hasn't been done adequately in the delta, and this would be very cost effective, would be to put gates on these channels so that you could redirect water as needed in order to flush salinity that comes as well from agricultural runoff or salinity that comes in during high tide. You could redirect those flows to protect species and to move salt water out and to get more fresh water into the vicinity of the pumps. Another reason you want to dredge is you could leave more water in the reservoirs because you'd have more throughput. So the flooding that may occur when there's a late snowmelt, you could bring more of that water through, which means that you could keep more water in the reservoir for the same amount of calculated risk from a late, a fast snowmelt or a late spring storm. So there's all kinds of advantages to dredging, and that's another aspect of delta management, which is it goes to the reservoirs themselves. If you had better weather forecasting and if you modified the rules that were in the 1950s, they haven't been modified. So they have to be taken into account better forecasting, and if they did that, they could leave more water in the reservoirs. And finally, for delta management, they need to clean up the sewage coming out of the plants on the San Francisco Bay. There's 37 sewage treatment plants that they don't do tertiary treatment. They're releasing 400,000 acre-feet of nitrogen-rich sewage into the bay every year. And when they get toxic algae blooms that feed on the nitrogen and die, and fish die inside there's no oxygen, they blame it on climate change. Climate change is a variable. I mean, because we do have hot summers and sometimes things get warm. I'm not going to, that could be a blip, and maybe it could be something we all have to panic about. Whatever, yeah, it does get hot, sometimes that's a factor, but the main factor is there's too much nitrogen in the water. And they want to throw all this water into the San Francisco Bay to flush the nitrogen out. So if they just obey the Clean Water Act, where is the Sierra Club for that? These cities need to invest what it takes to clean up their sewage. Now we can go to the final slide. So I hope I haven't exhausted you yet. This is the last one. This isn't as big a variable as how we manage the delta, but I think it's a very important one. And I think that desalination isn't taken seriously in California. It's not considered a solution that is cost effective, it's considered a waste of energy, and it's considered environmentally unacceptable. And I think all three of those objections have been overstated. I wasn't going to talk about the environmental part first, but I love this slide so much I have to. This represents the California current, and that represents 1 million acre-feet of brine that's twice as salty as the ocean. It's a ratio of 300,000 to 1. And you can go to Encyclopedia Britannica. I mean, I'm not making this stuff up. The California current is one of the most robust currents in the world. It moves 300 billion acre-feet from north to south every year. There's also an upwelling current, which comes from the depths of the ocean. The water rises up. So that compounds the circulation. You don't have circulation like that in the Mediterranean Sea or the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Sea, where we have massive desalination plants desalinating 40 million acre-feet a year. Desalination worldwide is producing 40 million acre-feet of fresh water every year. There's Australia, Singapore, a lot of island nations, mostly the Middle East. They are really getting good at desalination. The other big environmental objection, and by the way, the modern reverse osmosis filtration, the way they treat that water, it doesn't have the residual chemicals that it used to. You're literally just looking at water that's twice as salty as ocean water that can be dispersed under pressure into one of the most robust currents on Earth. So I don't think that brine is an environmental issue. There are a lot of people that probably know a lot more about it than I do that would take strong issue with that, but I think the big picture, and there's been a lot of studies looking at this. I mean, the experts, and I'm a generalist, I'm not an expert. I assimilate some of this stuff. I try to look at the numbers that matter, okay? But there's disagreement. There is credible expert disagreement over whether or not desalination brine is harmful. I don't think it is. The other objection is the intakes. The intakes themselves, there's a lot of ways to do it. If you have subsurface intakes, you're not going to get the volume of water that you need to do large-scale desalination. But subsurface intakes are being used like at Doheny, which is in Orange County. They killed the big desalination plant there in 2022, the Coastal Commission, but they did approve a small one because it has subsurface intakes, which is environmentally accepted. The water percolates through the seabed into chambers and it gets pumped up, and that's okay. But the way to do it at scale is to have intake pipe, and then you have an elongated cylinder that's covered with filtration fabric. And you make it, the trick to make it environmentally acceptable is to make it really big so that the velocity of the water going in through that filter is minimized. And really the question should be, well, how big are you going to make them and how many of them are you going to put down there? That will add costs, but that would offer a reasonable solution to these environmentalist concerns. You can have multiple intakes like that, and you can reverse the pressure periodically on one of them at a time to expel whatever's collecting on those filters. So I think that addresses the primary environmental concerns. When it comes to saying that it wastes energy, I think that's obviously a flawed reasoning, and I'll explain why. It takes 3,500 kilowatt hours. Here, you can check my numbers again if you wish.
So
you have to
you're
wake
right
up.
on. You're right on.
Okay. Nobody's looking at their phones like they're really good at this. This isn't going that bad because usually by now they're like half the people. But where were we? 3,500 kilowatt hours will desalinate an acre-feet, will produce an acre-feet of fresh water. So if we extrapolate, 3,500 gigawatt hours will desalinate 1 million acre-feet of water. Now that's a lot of electricity, but let's put that in perspective. California consumes 300,000 gigawatt hours of electricity a year. It's actually not quite, but it's good. We're going to go over 300,000 any day now because we've got all these things we want to do. We want to have data centers, we want to have EVs, we want to have heat pumps in our homes. We have all these things. The official goal, and I think they're going to need more if they really electrify the state, is 500,000 gigawatt hours a year. So if you're only going to pull out of that total 3,500 gigawatt hours, that's barely 1% of current use, to get 1 million acre feet. Here's another reason I don't think it wastes energy. The energy that it takes to go through the 6 pump stations along the California Aqueduct, get water from the Delta into Los Angeles, is equivalent to the amount of energy it would take to simply desalinate that fresh water. I mean, by about 10%. I mean, these numbers aren't exact, but they're roughly accurate. Another way of looking at this is if you took Diablo Canyon, which they want to shut down, well, somebody wants to shut Diablo Canyon down, that puts out 2 gigawatts of energy, and it's almost always up, so it generates about 18,000 gigawatt hours a year. If you just plugged all your desalination plants into Diablo Canyon, you could desalinate 5 million acre-feet of water a year.
Diablo County is a power plant?
Diablo Canyon.
County.
Did I say county?
I don't.
I mean, I would do that.
No, I doubt it. You're incorrect.
And my wife, she catches me all the time. Did you mean county?
It's nuclear power.
It's a nuclear power plant. Yeah, big, it's the big one.
Yeah,
So let's see.
sorry.
No, I know, you completely disrupted me. I'm getting old. I gotta work hard to get my focus here. So the point there is, if you look at that in a perspective of all of our electricity use in the state, it's minor. And so then, now let's talk about the cost, because that's obviously a concern. If you used a price of 20 cents a kilowatt hour, I believe the cost of electricity is inevitably coming down in California. But already you can get wholesale electricity, especially the utilities, for less than 20 cents a kilowatt hour. At 20 cents a kilowatt hour, it would cost per acre foot, it would cost a little under $1,000, which is a lot. But let me keep going, because it gets worse, I guess. If you built a plant for $1 billion for 50,000 acre feet of capacity, how am I doing?
Well, it's 700 acre feet instead of 1,000, but that's close enough.
Only 700?
Instead of what?
See, that's strength. That's the point I'm trying to make. I was way off. I think I did it at 30 cents, which is what we have to pay. And that was the number that was sticking in my head. But the thing about the electricity, drawing a blank again. You know, this is because I'm almost 70 years old. The energy cost per acre foot is yeah, 1,000 at the most. The financing cost at $1 billion for 50,000 acre feet of capacity at 4% rate of interest, 20-year bond. Here we go. Is also roughly $1,000. What is it really?
$1,472.
$1,400. Okay, so 14 plus 7 is 21. I was going to say $2,000 an acre foot is the vast proportion of your costs. It's actually, according to these assumptions, $2,100 an acre foot. That's a lot of money, but that's what people are paying in municipalities to get water nowadays. Pollen Water District of Southern California, which has 20 million people is in their client base, is $1,500 an acre foot, and it's going up 9% a year. Okay, so they're going to be up to $2,100 any day now. So when you look at it in that context, this is a cost that is survivable. It's a supply of water that's impervious to droughts, and it creates a diversity of supply so that if, for example, you know, somebody cyber hacks the Tehachapi pumps, you know, you're still going to have water. You're still going to have some water in Los Angeles. So those costs, I think, are also not a prohibitive barrier to having large-scale desalination. I know I forgot a whole bunch of stuff, but that's all I got, folks.
Wow, awesome. Wow.
Thank you so much, Edward. Before we go to Q&A, I want to add a couple of things. One is on the withdrawal from the Delta. There is some ecological debate, and I've been involved in the ecology study side of it, and the 12 figure is more than adequate. I mean, the data shows that really to preserve everything, and it's not so much the bay, it's the Delta. The data shows that there's nothing that would prevent us from taking that number 12 even lower. Mm-hmm. It's just a fantasy. That's an argument that's been used by certain political figures to support their agenda. But I think that's important. The other thing I wanted to say is that when I did the original aquifer studies decades ago in Monterey, Santa Cruz, and San Luis Obispo County, we were talking about the threat of saltwater intrusion of a few hundred meters. Now we're talking about saltwater intrusion on the order of miles, 1 to 2 to 3 miles. It's coming, it's more and more, and that's a reason that we have to reverse this. We have to protect our aquifers, as Edward has talked about, and recharge them, and we have to take it seriously. And this problem is both at the state level and our Board of Soups level, to produce policies that will enable us to keep our wells and keep our coastal aquifers intact. We've been going downhill for several decades, and we're just not paying attention to things that can be done. But let's go to question and answer.
Gordon, have you made presentations like this to the committees of jurisdiction in Sacramento?
I've talked with the water districts quite a bit, and they themselves have a lot of interaction, of course, with these guys. I haven't actually testified.
Does your organization lobby on this issue?
Well, yes and no. I'm involved with two groups. One is trying to bring dredging to the Delta, and we're working mostly with the federal government because the consensus among the farmers and lobbyists that are part of this group is that the state really isn't going to be helpful. So they're working with people at the Bureau of Reclamation and the Army Corps of Engineers. And I'm kind of I'm the administrative assistant. You know, like I get everybody on Zoom calls and schedule the meetings and write the minutes and whatnot. So we're working on that very hard.
If you were king, what sequence of things would you recommend doing?
You mean if I was Jerry Brown's dad? Because he was
Higher
king.
than him.
He did. That guy got things done. Before my time,
Okay.
I was in Cub Scouts. We were,
You got free reign. If you were to call the shots, what things would you do?
you know, there's a ballot. Well, I mean, that's a hard question to answer. Seriously, there's a ballot initiative right now that the California Chamber of Commerce finally came through and did something. They haven't been aggressive for a long time, but they put a ballot initiative up that's going to reform CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. And I'm really disappointed that Spencer Pratt lost because there's a lot of people that are going to stay home. And I'm really disappointed that Steve Hilton had to fight off Chad Bianco because all of Bianco's voters are going to stay home. So all of Spencer Pratt's voters and all of Chad Bianco's voters are going to stay home. And all the bad initiatives are going to pass, and all the good initiatives are going to get defeated. So let's try to, spread the word, because there's reasons to vote that have nothing to do with the candidates. There are ballot initiatives that are extremely consequential this November. But that one, if I was king, I would just say that it passed. We fixed CEQA, and I could go on. I mean, let's build a canal from the Mississippi River to Lake Powell, okay? And let's dump 10 million acre feet a year.
Years ago, I was wondering why don't you get a canal from Washington and Oregon, just bring it.
Yeah, the Columbia River Canal, that actually was
Bring
good.
it, tunnel over down, and you don't have to worry about all the idiots in California.
Well, like I said, answering that question, there are some wonderful possibilities if we were kings. Yes, there really are.
Desalination. At the scale you imagine, is coastal siting an issue?
No. The Ashkelon plant in Israel is 300 acres, and they produce, I think it's up to 350,000 acre feet a year on 300 acres. And that's everything,
Yeah, the figures you had for the desal, that was for ocean water, is that correct?
Yes.
If you had water that was just brackish, say a half salt content, would the cost go down
Yes.
proportionately?
I don't know if it's proportionate, but I think it is. And the energy cost as well.
The energy cost, yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
that's right.
So there's a proposal, I think it's from CalAm, to do sand wells at Marina and bring up the brackish water for their desal project.
Are you talking about in Costa Mesa or?
No, Marina, California.
Yeah, they're trying to, that's what Mesa's trying to do down in Southern California. It's a really good idea because it can actually help advance the freshwater, because you've got saltwater intrusion coming into these aquifers on the coast.
Yeah.
And when you pull that water out, it actually apparently has a favorable impact on saltwater intrusion
Bring it
as
in
well.
the fresh water?
Well, you have a battle in the aquifers on the coast between the fresh water that's seeping towards the ocean and the ocean water that's seeping into the underground on the surface. And I think extracting that brackish water actually helps that ratio favorably.
Discuss compliance under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and how that's going to affect acreage under production.
Well, that's another one where if you don't mind your P's and Q's, you really got to get in your car quick and drive away fast, because it's something that is life and death for a lot of these farmers. Their argument is, you cut our water allocations, which happened, started around 2000. They almost always got 100% of their contracted allocations until around 2000, and since then they might have gotten it once or twice. Sometimes they only get 5 or 10% of their allocation. And there's this myth that they're not paying for that water. They're still paying off the bonds that were used to finance the state water project in the Delta-Mendota Canal. So these farmers are paying for that water whether they get it or not. Their argument is, when you cut the deliveries, we started pumping up the groundwater. And that's mostly true. I mean, if you look at the big numbers, that is what happened. Most of this really, really severe subsidence and aquifer depletions just in the last 20 years. And it's, everybody admits it's a problem. When you can't move, they already spent over $200 million and they're only halfway done repairing the Fryon-Kern Canal because of subsidence. And they have subsidence on the Delta-Mendota, on the California aqueduct, and on the smaller aqueducts. So all of the farmers know something's got to give. They know that. But the water districts throughout the San Joaquin Valley are handling it, they're all handling it in different ways, and it's very contentious.
But the compliance actually going to kick in at a higher level.
The compliance has been phased to, I think they got till 2040. I mean, they're recognizing, we don't want to, and this is to the credit of the state, they're recognizing we don't want to actually kill our entire agricultural industry. So they're giving them time. The general principle is put more in than you take out. You know, and if we can just keep everybody on that and hopefully get a lot of this surplus water into these percolation basins that are being formed, and they're not very expensive, you know, to allocate a little bit of your field and divert water into it. If they can reform the permitting process for that, they can do it in a way that doesn't threaten their summertime water allocations, things are going to improve.
So are they set apart from districts? Because districts have to develop their own management.
Yes, that's right. It varies very much from district to district.
Peter?
Just quickly, Ed, I was wondering, has technological progress and capital market excitement around SMRs made desal more viable?
Not yet. Yeah. You know, the SMRs, I mean, we love that stuff, right? I love technology, and we go, wow, you know, you can just, it's like a big battery. You can just plunk it down and plug it in, and 30 years later you put a different one. You take it away and put another one in. What a great idea. I'd be interested in knowing what companies you think are on the leading edge of that. I don't think we have a commercial one yet, but we're getting real close. And yes, that's going to make a difference on all kinds of stuff, right? I mean, the idea with data centers is they have to have no net water usage. And right now, they haven't figured out how to collect the evaporative water, even when they recycle. So they have to work on that. You know, that's how they're going to sell it. There's three problems: water, energy, and noise, right? So they got to resolve all of that. SMRs could be a big part of the energy solution.
What's an SMR?
All kinds of stuff, small modular reactors. That you've had.
Thank you, Edward and Michael, for your facilitating this discussion. And just for the sake of full disclosure, and I want to give maybe a public service announcement. My name is Brad Ingamura. I'm actually one of the directors on the Marina Coast Water District, and I've been serving for now the past almost 4 years. We have 3 seats coming open in November. I haven't decided whether or not I'm going to continue. But anyway, getting on in relationship to your discussion, we've actually reactivated our desal facilities. So once it gets started up, we're going to be able to supply initially up to 1,000 homes with desal. So that's what we're doing. We're being proactive about that. And so again, I appreciate the discussion here.
You mentioned the water retention basins. Would those be on private land or
Yes.
public or a combination?
Well, the infiltration beds in the delta, the big one, you know, the fish-friendly delta diversions, I expect that would be publicly acquired land because it's a pretty big public works project.
Yeah.
But the percolation basins to store that water down in the San Joaquin Valley, that could be on private land, absolutely, and it could be in 1,000 different places.